Don't look in his eyes, the beautiful slave who killed with a glare. The first time I heard those words, they weren't shouted like a warning in a ghost story. They were whispered, quick, practical, terrified, by a kitchen girl who couldn't have been older than 15. She pressed a finger to her lips, eyes darting to the doorway, as if the walls themselves might report her. "Don't," she breathed. "If he looks at you, don't look back." I should have laughed. I didn't, because behind her, in the bright slice of lamplight that cut the hall in half, a man was standing so still he might have been carved. Not chained at the moment, not being dragged, not being struck, not calling out, just standing, waiting. He was dressed like the house wanted to pretend he was a person. Clean shirt, dark waistcoat, hair tied neatly back. The kind of clothing a master gave to a servant when company came, to show off wealth the way you show off silver. And he was beautiful in a way that made people angry for no reason they could admit. But it wasn't the beauty that made the kitchen girl tremble. It was the eyes. They weren't pale, not the way rumor likes to dress us in. They were dark, deep, glossy, almost black, until the light hit them, and then something inside them sparked like a blade catching the sun. He didn't smile at me. He just looked. And I felt, ridiculous as it sounds, like I'd stepped too close to a mirror. And the mirror had decided it was going to tell the truth. Behind me upstairs, a man screamed, not a long scream, not the kind you can blame on drunkenness or a bad dream. A sharp, sudden sound, cut off like a cord snapped. Then there was a thud, and the house went quiet in the way it does when everyone hears something they aren't allowed to ask about. The kitchen girl grabbed my sleeve so hard her nails bit through cloth. "You hear?" she hissed. That's why they say it." "Who is he?" I whispered. Her throat worked. "They call him Luce, short for Lucian, but don't say it like you know him." "Why?" Because at that moment, footsteps came pounding down the staircase. 2 men, boots heavy and a third dragging behind. The third one was half-dressed, hair wild, face wet with sweat, one hand clutching his chest like he'd been stabbed. He wasn't stabbed. There was no blood, no knife, no gunshot, just terror. "Doctor!" he gasped, as if a doctor could stitch up whatever he'd seen. The 2 men hauled him past the kitchen doorway, straight toward the parlor where the good clock sat ticking and the portrait of the master's father watched like a judge. And there, in the hall, they passed Lucian. For the first time he moved. Not much. Just a turn of his head, a slow, deliberate shift of attention, a glance. The half-dressed man, Mr. Kells, I'd learn later, a lawyer from New Orleans, lifted his eyes at the exact wrong moment. Their gazes met. Lucian didn't lunge, didn't speak, didn't even blink. He only looked at the lawyer the way a man looks at a door he already has the key to. Mr. Kells made a sound like a sob that got lost halfway through itself. His knees buckled. The 2 men holding him jolted, trying to keep him upright, but his weight went dead and heavy, like the strings inside him had been cut. They dragged him into the parlor anyway, because in a house like that, you didn't collapse in the hallway. You collapsed where the rugs could hide it. The kitchen girl let go of my sleeve. Her whisper turned into something like prayer. "Told you," she said. "Don't look." I was 23, and I'd come to Belle Rive Plantation because I was hungry in the plain. Ordinary way men are hungry when they've spent too long pretending pride can be eaten. My name is Jonah Pike. I'd been a printer's apprentice once. A typesetter. A man who knew how to make words march in neat lines, even when the truth refused to. In New Orleans, the paper I worked for had started hearing rumors. Big ones, rich ones, the kind that sold ink and stirred fear in equal measure. A slave on a sugar plantation upriver was killing people with a look, not poisoning, not stabbing, not sneaking into bedrooms with a razor. A look, a glare. And I told myself I was coming for a story, nothing more. But stories are rarely content to stay ink on paper. Some of them reach out, some of them look back. Belle Reeve sat near the river, where the water moved slow and brown, heavy with secrets and silt. The land around it was flat, rich, and brutal. Fields that swallowed men whole, rows that never ended, heat that made your thoughts feel thick. The big house, though, was a different world. High ceilings, wide verandas, curtains that breathed in and out with the night air. Inside, it smelled like polished wood, an old perfume, and something sour beneath it all, like fruit left too long in a bowl, pretty until it wasn't. The owner, Etienne Marchand, was a Creole planter with hands soft enough to prove he didn't do his own work. He greeted me with the kind of smile that asked a question without speaking. "How much trouble are you? And can I buy you off?" His wife, Genevieve, didn't bother with smiles. She looked me over as if I were a stain someone had carried in on their boot. And their daughter, Aurelia, 25, with the posture of a woman trained to be admired, watched from behind a fan like she was measuring how dangerous a poor printer could be. Marchand offered me brandy. I said no. He offered me a room. I accepted that because my shoes were worn and my ribs ached with the memory of empty meals. In that first hour, I learned something about Belle Reeve that no rumor had ever mentioned. The house was full of mirrors. Not just a looking glass here and there. Mirrors in the hallways, mirrors in the parlor, mirrors in the dining room, a tall one in the corner of the library, framed in gold like a saint. So many reflections it made you feel like you weren't alone even when you were. "Genevieve collects them," Marchand said when he saw me noticing. His voice tried for light, but something in it tightened. "She says they make a house lively." Genevieve's gaze flicked toward the nearest mirror as if to confirm it was still obeying. Aurelia's fan paused, and in the reflection of that tall mirror, I saw Lucien for the first time without him looking at me. He stood behind the dining room door, half hidden, waiting like an idea someone hadn't dared speak aloud. He was holding a cloth, polishing the silver tray with slow, careful strokes. Even his hands moved, like they had to be quiet. When he lifted the tray and the lamp caught it, the light flashed briefly, bright, sharp. In that instant, Lucien's eyes lifted. Not toward me, but toward my reflection. And I looked away like a coward. That night, the house didn't sleep. Not truly. It settled. It listened. It creaked and sighed and kept secrets in its walls. Sometime after midnight, I heard voices in the hallway outside my door, hushed, furious. "She can't have him out during company," a man snapped. "Not with the talk spreading. And what do you suggest?" Another voice, Marchand's, tight as a drawn wire. "Hide him in the cellar like contraband." "You should sell him," the first man said. "Get rid of the problem." "And watch the buyers refuse?" Marchand hissed back. "You think I haven't tried? You think I haven't watched men with pockets full of money step back like he's plague?" Then a third voice, softer but sharper, slipped in like a knife. "Aurelia." "Father," she said quietly, "maybe the problem isn't him." There was a pause. Then Marchand's voice, low and cold. "You don't know what you're saying." Aurelia's fan wasn't there in the darkness, but I could hear it in her tone. Controlled, practiced. "I know exactly what I'm saying," she replied. "People are dying, and the only thing everyone agrees on is this: it happens after he looks at them." "And you believe that?" the first man scoffed. "That the boy's eyes kill?" "I believe," Aurelia said, "that men who do cruel things are afraid of being seen." Silence. Then Marchand again. "Don't speak like that in this house." "I won't speak at all," Aurelia said. "Not if you don't make me." Footsteps moved away, and from somewhere down the hall I heard a soft, steady sound, cloth against glass. Someone was polishing a mirror in the dark. The next morning, Mr. Kells was dead. They didn't say it outright, of course. The big house had rules about what was spoken and what was swallowed. But I saw the servants' faces, tight, pale, eyes down. I saw Marchand's jaw clenched until the muscle jumped. I saw Genevieve's hands trembling slightly as she poured tea, then hiding it by gripping the porcelain too hard. And I saw Aurelia staring at the mirror in the dining room as if she expected it to open like a door. When she noticed me watching, she snapped her fan shut. "You're the printer," she said. "I'm Jonah," I replied carefully. "Yes, ma'am. You came because of the story," she said. I didn't deny it. She leaned closer. Close enough I could smell her perfume, sweet and suffocating, like flowers left in a hot room. "Then write this," she whispered. "Write that he didn't die screaming. He died quiet, like he'd realized something and it stole his breath." Before I could answer, Genevieve swept in, eyes flashing. "Aurelia," she said sharply, "leave Mr. Pike alone." Aurelia straightened, her face blank again. Genevieve turned to me. "My husband has been generous to you," she said. "Do not repay that generosity with imagination." Her gaze slid deliberately toward the hallway mirror, and in it again I saw Lucian, standing perfectly still, watching without appearing to. He didn't look at me. He looked at Genevieve. And Genevieve, who was brave enough to order a man's life ruined with a sentence, flinched as if cold water had touched her skin. That's when I understood the first true thing about Lucien Marchand's house slave. People weren't afraid because he looked strange. People were afraid because when he looked at them, he looked like he knew them, not their names, their secrets. I started asking questions the way a hungry man starts stealing. Careful, quick, always watching who might see. The cook, an older woman named Minta, would only speak when her hands were busy kneading dough. "Them mirrors," she muttered, eyes on the flour. "Missus say she liked to see herself, but ain't that—" "What is it then?" I asked. Minta's mouth tightened. "Mirrors don't just show you, they show you what behind you." That sounded like superstition, but her voice held no playfulness. "Lucien," I said quietly. "Why are they scared of him?" Minta's hand slowed. She glanced at the doorway, then back to me. "'Cause he ain't just pretty," she whispered. "He ain't just a house thing." "What is he?" Her eyes flicked up sharp. "He a witness." Before I could press, she shoved the dough down hard as if punishing it. "Hush now," she snapped louder for anyone listening. "Get on out my kitchen. I got work." I went to the quarters that evening, carefully, with the excuse of offering tobacco and news. I didn't belong there, I knew it. My skin and my free status made every step feel like a trespass. But I'd learned long ago that truth rarely waits politely where it's allowed. In the shadow of a leaning oak, a man was carving something into a scrap of wood. Small, neat cuts. He looked up when I approached. He was older than Lucien, broad-shouldered, with eyes tired in the way of someone who'd learned hope was dangerous. "Name's Josiah," he said without warmth. "You lost." "I'm asking," I said. "About Lucien." Josiah's carving stopped. A murmur moved through the nearby people like wind in dry leaves. "Don't say it loud," someone hissed. Josiah stared at me for a long moment, then spat into the dust. "You the one writing?" he asked. "I work for a paper," I admitted. You heard he kill with his eyes," Josiah finished, voice flat. "That what you heard?" "Yes." Josiah leaned closer. His voice dropped until it was barely more than breath. "Some folks die when they get seen," he said. "Not 'cause of magic. 'Cause of what they done." "That's not an answer," I whispered. Josiah's mouth twisted, almost a smile, but bitter. "It's the only answer you deserve," he said. Then, after a pause, he added, "But if you want a story, I'll give you one." He pointed with his chin toward the big house, where the lights burned even as the sun went down, stubborn as pride. "Mrs. Genevieve loved mirrors," he said. "She loved to look, and she loved to make other folks look too. Make 'em see they place. Make 'em feel small. He tapped the wood with his knife. Lucian was the one she picked to polish him. Every mirror, every day, like a prayer. I pictured it. That quiet cloth sound in the dark. Josiah's eyes narrowed. You know what happened when you polish something every day. It shines, I said. No, Josiah replied. You learn every scratch, every crack, every lie it tell. He leaned in closer. Lucian learned how people look when they lying, he said. He learned how they eyes flick when they scared. He learned what a guilty man do when he think nobody see. A shiver ran through me that had nothing to do with the night air. You saying he scares them to death? I asked. Josiah shrugged. I'm saying sometimes he just look. And after that, folks make choices. What choices? Josiah stared at me long and hard. The kind that end a man, he said simply. Then he stood, slipping the carving into his pocket as if the conversation was finished. Don't go thinking him a devil, he added. Devil ain't the one in chains. I walked back toward the big house, with my thoughts knotted tight. On the veranda, Aurelia stood alone, staring out toward the river. Her white dress caught the moonlight and made her look like a figure from a painting. Beautiful, distant, unreal. She didn't turn when I approached. You went down there, she said. I did, I admitted. Her voice was calm, but I heard something sharp beneath it. Curiosity, maybe, or fear. They told you about him, she said. What did they say? That he's a witness, I replied. Aurelia's hand tightened on the railing. Witness to what? She asked. Before I could answer, the front door opened behind us. Genevieve stepped out, her face pale, her eyes bright with something like fury. Aurelia, she snapped. Inside! Aurelia didn't move. Genevieve's gaze cut to me like a whip. Mr. Pike, she said, voice sweet and poisonous. You are our guest. Do not forget that. I wanted to say something clever, something brave. Instead, my eyes flicked, traitorous, to the hallway mirror through the open door. Lucian stood there, half in shadow. He was watching Genevieve. Genevieve followed my gaze by instinct, like a woman who'd learned the danger of being watched. Her eyes met his. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Genevieve's lips parted. Her breath caught, not fear like a startled gasp, fear like recognition. Then she recovered, snapping her head away as if breaking a spell. Inside, she repeated, harsher now to Aurelia. Now! Aurelia finally moved, passing me without a word. Genevieve turned back to the door, but before she stepped inside, she murmured, so quiet I barely heard it. You keep him out of sight. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Lucian. And Lucian, still silent, inclined his head, like a servant, like a judge granting a brief mercy. The next death didn't happen in the house. It happened at a riverboat gathering 2 nights later. One of those glossy parties the wealthy threw to pretend their world wasn't built on suffering. Marchand invited neighboring planters, a judge, a banker, and a man who owned an auction yard in the city, Mr. Boudin, whose smile looked practiced in the mirror. They dressed Belle Reve in lanterns and music and fine food, as if light could drown out what the fields remembered. I was there because Marchand wanted me there. He'd decided, I think, that if I saw enough gentility, I'd write a prettier story. Lucian served the drinks with the smooth efficiency of a man trained to be invisible. But he wasn't invisible. Not to the guests. I watched them watch him, men's eyes lingering too long, women's eyes narrowing, calculating. Aurelia sat at the piano, playing something soft and elegant. Genevieve hovered behind her like a shadow with jewelry. Then Silas Haskins arrived, the overseer. He was the kind of man who carried violence in his posture even when his hands were empty. He laughed too loudly, slapped other men's backs too hard, drank like he was trying to wash something out of his mouth. When he saw Lucian, his grin widened. Well, Haskins drawled, loud enough for everyone to hear, there's the little prince. A few men chuckled uncomfortably. Genevieve's eyes flicked toward Marchand, warning. Marchand forced a laugh. Haskins? Mind your manners. Haskins lifted his glass toward Lucian. Manners, he repeated, and then his gaze slid down Lucian's face, slow and ugly. He got eyes like he thinks he's somebody. The room tightened. Lucian didn't react. He poured the drink, held the tray steady, expression blank. Haskins leaned closer. Look at me, he commanded, voice low but cruel. I want to see if you got that devil in you folks been whispering about. Lucian's hand paused, not trembling, not frightened, just paused. And then, very slowly, Lucian lifted his eyes. Haskins' grin faltered for the first time. For a moment, I saw it, an almost childlike uncertainty flickering across the overseer's face, like a man waking from a dream and not knowing where he is. Then Haskins' mouth opened. He didn't speak. He swallowed hard, like something bitter had risen in his throat. Lucian leaned in just enough to murmur something no one else could hear. Haskins jerked backward. His chair scraped the floor. Several people laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke, but Haskins' face had turned the color of old paper. What did you say? He rasped. Lucian said nothing. He only looked. Haskins' chest heaved. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for a door that hadn't been there before. Then, in a sudden burst, he stumbled away from the table, pushing past a guest, knocking over a glass. He headed toward the veranda, toward the dark stretch of steps that led down to the river path. Marchand half rose. Haskins! Genevieve's fingers clamped onto Marchand's arm. Aurelia stopped playing. The last note hung in the air like a held breath. Lucian watched Haskins go without moving. I foolishly followed. Not close. Not enough to be seen. Just enough to witness. Haskins reached the veranda steps and grabbed the railing so hard his knuckles went white. He whispered something to himself, words snatched by the night wind. Then he looked back. Not toward me. Toward the dining room window where light spilled out, where Lucian's silhouette stood framed for a moment, dark against bright. Haskins' face twisted. His mouth opened in a scream that never fully formed. He stumbled down the steps. His foot missed. His body went forward. There was a thump, dull, final. Then silence. When I got closer, I didn't see blood. I didn't see anything grotesque. I saw a man sprawled awkwardly, breathing shallow, eyes wide and unfocused, as if staring at something only he could see. He made a small sound, half sob, half gasp. Then he stopped moving. Someone behind me shouted. Feet pounded. Lantern light swung wildly, and suddenly the veranda was full of people pretending they hadn't heard rumors about Lucian's eyes. Marchand pushed through, face hard. Genevieve arrived a heartbeat later, her expression controlled, but her hands trembling at her sides. Aurelia came last, pale as moonlight. And Lucian stood in the doorway, holding a tray, perfectly composed. His eyes were on Haskins' body. Not triumphant, not cruel, just present. Genevieve's gaze flicked to Lucian, sharp with accusation. Marchand's jaw clenched. The judge crossed himself. Mr. Boudin, the auction man, stepped backward as if the air itself had teeth. And someone, one of the guests, voice shaking, whispered it aloud at last. Don't look in his eyes. The phrase traveled faster than the river. By morning, it wasn't just Belle Reve talking. It was every porch in town, every card table, every church step, where white men gathered to pretend God approved of their comfort. They told the story wrong, of course. They said Haskins challenged Lucian, and Lucian glared, and Haskins dropped dead like a puppet. They said Lucian's eyes were cursed. They said his mother was a foreign woman who knew dark things. They said he was beautiful because the devil likes his tools handsome. They said the Marchands were hiding him because they were afraid he'd turn his eyes on them next. And in the quarters, the enslaved people didn't correct the story. They let it grow, because fear in that world was one of the only weapons they could lift without being whipped for it. I expected Marchand to send me away after Haskins died. Instead, he called me into his study. The study smelled like ink and leather and money. A mirror hung behind the desk, angled, so a man could watch the door without turning his head. Marchand's fingers drummed on the wood. "You saw," he said. "I saw an accident," I replied carefully. Marchand's eyes narrowed. "You saw him look." "I saw Lucian standing in a doorway," I said. Marchand leaned forward. "What did he do?" I hesitated. Marchand's voice sharpened. "Mr. Pike, I have fed you, housed you, treated you like a man. If you have any gratitude, you will tell me what you think." I met his gaze, then deliberately looked at the mirror behind him. Lucian wasn't there. Of course he wasn't, but the mirror still made it feel like someone was listening. "I think," I said slowly, "that people are afraid of being seen." Marchand's face tightened as if I'd slapped him. "You think you're clever," he said. "No," I replied. "I think you're afraid." Marchand rose so fast his chair scraped. His voice dropped, dangerous. "Do you know what it would mean if that slave became a symbol? Do you know what men do to symbols when they're frightened?" I swallowed. Marchand's gaze flicked again to the mirror. For the first time, I saw something like panic in him. "Genevieve wants him gone," he muttered. Aurelia thinks she can manage it, like a problem in needlework. But I tell you, Mr. Pike, there is something wrong in this house." He stared at the mirror too long. Then he whispered, as if afraid the glass would repeat it. "He knows." "What does he know?" I asked. Marchand's eyes snapped to mine. For a moment I thought he might answer honestly. Instead he said, "Nothing," too quickly. "He knows nothing. He's a slave." Then he turned away, his shoulders rigid. "I want you to leave," he said, voice flat. "After breakfast." So that was it. I'd come for a story and gotten thrown out of it. Except Belle Reeve wasn't finished with me. As I packed my bag, a soft knock came at my door. When I opened it, Aurelia stood there. Her face was composed, but her eyes were bright with something restless. "May I come in?" she asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She entered, looked around, and then, without warning, said, "My father is lying to you." I said nothing. Aurelia's hands clasped tightly. "Mr. Kells didn't die of fright," she whispered. "He died because he saw something in this house he wasn't meant to see." "What did he see?" I asked. Aurelia's gaze flicked to the mirror in my room, small above the washstand. "He saw himself," she said, voice bitter, "and he didn't like what he looked like." That sounded poetic, not truthful, and yet her expression was deadly serious. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Aurelia's fan trembled slightly in her grip. "Because everyone is using him," she said. "My mother uses him like a decorative object. My father uses him like a warning. The guests use him like a story to frighten themselves with." "And you?" I asked quietly. Aurelia's lips parted, then pressed together. She began, then stopped. Then, as if forcing herself, she said, "I want to know what he is." "He's a man," I said. Aurelia flinched, as if the word hurt. Then she stepped closer and lowered her voice. "If you want your story," she whispered, "don't write the rumor. Write the reason." "What reason?" I asked. Aurelia's eyes gleamed. "Tonight," she said, "my mother is holding a private supper. No guests, just family, just the truth." She hesitated, then added, "And Lucian will be serving." My pulse quickened. Aurelia reached into her reticule and pressed a folded scrap of paper into my hand. "After midnight," she said, "go to the mirror gallery." "The what?" Aurelia's smile was sharp and nervous. "You really don't know this house," she murmured. "My mother's favorite room is the one no one talks about." Then she turned and left, moving down the hallway like she hadn't just handed me the most dangerous invitation in Louisiana. I waited until the house quieted, until the lamps dimmed, until the servants' footsteps faded. Then I followed memory and whispers until I found the mirror gallery. It was behind a door disguised as paneling in the hallway. Wood carved so neatly it looked like part of the wall. I would never have found it if Aurelia hadn't told me exactly where to press. When it opened, cool air spilled out. The room beyond was long and narrow, lined with mirrors of every size. Tall ones, short ones, round ones, cracked ones. Some framed in gold, some in simple wood, some dark with age. In the far corner, a single lamp burned low, throwing wavering light that made every reflection look slightly wrong. And there, in the middle of that room, Lucian stood alone. He wasn't polishing. He was waiting. My mouth went dry. I stepped in carefully, the door clicking shut behind me. In the mirrors, I saw myself multiplied. Dozens of Jonahs, all looking equally foolish. Lucian turned his head. His eyes landed on me. I felt my spine stiffen. For a heartbeat, I remembered the kitchen girl's whisper and the lawyer's collapse and Haskins's fall. I wanted to look away, but something in Lucian's gaze pinned me like a nail. Not force, not magic, a decision. He studied me as if weighing whether I was worth the risk. Then, to my shock, he spoke. His voice was low, steady, careful, like someone who didn't waste words. "You came for the story," he said. I swallowed. Yes. Lucian's eyes flicked to the mirror behind me, catching my reflection. "Then look," he said. My throat tightened. "They say not to." Lucian's mouth curved. Not quite a smile. Not quite anything gentle. "They say many things," he replied. He stepped closer. The lamplight struck his eyes and made that hidden spark appear again, like a blade catching sun. I forced myself not to flinch. Lucian's voice dropped. "You know why they afraid?" I shook my head. Lucian raised a hand and pointed, not at me, but at the mirrors. "In here," he said, "they can't hide." My skin prickled. Lucian's gaze sharpened. "Your paper," he said. "You set words down. Make them stay." "Yes," I whispered. Lucian's eyes held mine. "Then make this stay," he said. And then, very softly, so softly it felt like the room leaned in to listen, he said the sentence that changed everything. "I don't kill with my eyes." I stared at him. "But people die." Lucian's face didn't change. "They die," he said, "because they think I can see what they did." My pulse hammered. "What did they do?" I asked. Lucian's gaze moved, slow, deliberate, across my face, as if reading me like a page. "You want the reason," he said. "You ready to carry it?" I should have said no. I should have backed out and gone home and written a safer lie. Instead, I nodded. Lucian lifted his chin toward the nearest mirror. In it, I saw his face beside mine. Two men trapped in the same glass, one free, one not, both afraid. "Mr. Kells," Lucian said, voice flat. "He came here to fix papers." "Fix what?" I asked. Lucian's eyes narrowed. "A sale," he said. "A sale that wasn't supposed to happen." A cold heaviness settled in my gut. Lucian's voice stayed even. "My father wanted to move people quietly," he said. "Not through the city. Not through the legal yard. Quiet." I blinked. "Your father?" Lucian watched me carefully. Then, like he'd decided the truth was less dangerous than my confusion, he said, "Etienne Marchand owns me." My mouth went dry. "You called him—" Lucian's gaze didn't waver. "He owns my name," he said. "Not my blood." I felt a sharp, sick jolt of understanding. "You mean—" Lucian's expression remained controlled, but something tightened around his eyes. "I look like him," he said simply. "That's why they dress me nice. That's why misses hate me. That's why folks stare." My stomach turned. Lucian continued, voice steady, almost clinical. "Mr. Kells saw papers with names," he said. "Names of people. Children, men, women. He didn't describe what would happen to them. He didn't have to." My hands clenched. Lucian's eyes burned. "He saw the truth," he said. "And he thought he could make money off it." "How did he die?" I asked, my voice rough. Lucian's gaze held mine. He looked at me, he said. And he knew I knew. A chill ran down my spine. You threatened him? I asked. Lucian's mouth twitched, bitter. I don't threaten, he said. I remind. Remind him of what? Lucian's voice dropped to a whisper. Of the girl in the city he keeps in a room and tells folks she ain't there, he said. My breath caught. Lucian's eyes were merciless. He thought he had secrets buried deep, he murmured. Then a slave looked at him like he was already uncovered. I swallowed hard. And he... What? He panicked. Lucian's gaze flicked to the mirror again. He ran, he said. He begged. He tried to make a deal. And then, Lucian's voice remained flat. Then he realized, he said, that deals don't wash. I stared, sick with it. So he died because of guilt. Lucian's eyes sharpened. Guilt, he repeated softly, like tasting a strange word. Maybe. He stepped closer until I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. The exhaustion held tight behind control. Or maybe, he said, he died because the people he betrayed didn't want him living. My pulse stuttered. You mean, I started? Lucian's expression didn't change, but the room felt suddenly colder. Don't write their names, he said quietly. If you write the fear. My mouth went dry. Who are they? I asked. Lucian didn't answer directly. Instead, he lifted his gaze and looked past me, into the mirrors, into the multiplied reflections. And for the first time, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. In several mirrors, just for a heartbeat, I thought I saw movement behind us. Not ghosts, people. Shadows shifting where they shouldn't. Then stillness again. Lucian's voice was low. This house full of eyes, he murmured. Not just mine. The door behind me creaked. I spun. In the doorway stood Josiah, the carpenter, broad as a wall. Behind him, Minta, the cook. And a third person I didn't recognize, an older woman with a headscarf, eyes bright and fierce. They didn't look at me. They looked at Lucian. Lucian turned his head slightly, meeting Josiah's gaze. Not long, not dramatic, just a glance. Josiah nodded once. Minta exhaled. The older woman's eyes narrowed in approval. And I understood. Suddenly, terribly, that Lucian's glare wasn't a curse. It was a signal. A language built out of what they were allowed to do. Look, turn, notice, survive. A code without letters. A message no overseer could whip out of a man because it lived in the space between blinks. My throat tightened. You're not alone, I whispered. Lucian's gaze held mine. No, he said. I'm not. And then, as if the house itself had overheard and decided to punish honesty, a voice cut through the hallway outside. Genevieve's, sharp as glass. Who is in there? Minta's face tightened. Josiah's shoulders squared. Lucian didn't flinch. He stepped toward the door, posture shifting instantly into servant shape. Head bowed slightly, hands ready, expression blank. He was about to open it, to be invisible again. But before he did, he looked back at me. One last glance, quick and piercing. In that glance, I saw it clearly. Not magic, not murder, a promise. If you write this, write it right. If you speak, speak true. If you look, don't look away. Lucian opened the door. Genevieve stood there, candle in hand, her face tight with suspicion. Her eyes flicked past Lucian into the mirror room. For a heartbeat, I thought she'd see us all. But Josiah and Minta and the older woman had melted back into shadow behind the mirrors like they'd never existed. Only I remained, stupidly visible. Genevieve's gaze landed on me. Her mouth tightened. Mr. Pike, she said, voice icy sweet, you are leaving this morning? I tried to speak. Lucian's hand moved, subtle, almost invisible, just enough to catch Genevieve's attention. She turned toward him reflexively. Their eyes met. Genevieve's breath hitched, not because she feared being killed, because she feared being known. Lucian didn't blink. Genevieve's hand trembled, and candle wax dripped onto her fingers. She didn't even notice the burn. Then she snapped her head away, furious at herself for reacting. Out! She hissed to me. Now, I left, but the story didn't leave me, and Belle Reve didn't let me go. Because once you've seen how fear works, once you've watched powerful people crumble under the weight of being truly observed, you can't unsee it. The next week, 3 things happened in quick succession. First, Marchand announced he would host an auction on his own land, private, for select buyers, because the city yards were too loud, too full of eyes not his. Second, a judge from Baton Rouge arrived, not with laughter and cigars, but with documents and a grim mouth. Third, Mr. Boudin, the auction man, was found in his carriage one morning, alive but shaking, his hair damp with sweat, whispering the same phrase over and over like a prayer he didn't believe in. Don't look, don't look, don't look. When I heard that, something in me tightened like a rope. I was supposed to be gone. Marchand's order had been clear. But I stayed near enough, sleeping in a cheap room in town, coming back under the excuse of collecting my things, and then, later, under no excuse at all. Because whatever was happening at Belle Reve, it was bigger than one rumor. It was a war fought in glances and whispers, in papers and mirrors, in who got to be seen and who got to be erased. And Lucian, beautiful, dangerous, silent, stood at the center of it, like a match held near dry tinder. On the morning of the private auction, the yard behind the big house filled with men wearing money like armor. They walked to the rows of enslaved people with practiced indifference, pretending they were buying livestock, not tearing lives apart. Some of the enslaved stared at the ground. Some stared straight ahead. And Lucian stood near the veranda steps, dressed in his clean waistcoat, his hair tied back, the perfect display piece. Genevieve hovered at the edge of the crowd, her eyes sharp with satisfaction. Aurelia stood behind her father, face pale, jaw tight. Marchand spoke loudly, warmly, selling the illusion of civilized commerce. Then Mr. Boudin arrived. He stepped out of his carriage slowly, as if afraid the sunlight would bite. His eyes flicked nervously toward the big house. When he spotted Lucian, his face went tight. He looked away quickly, too quickly, but Lucian's gaze followed him anyway, steady and calm. Mr. Boudin's throat bobbed. He forced a laugh, loud and false. "Well," he said, addressing Marchand too brightly, "you really do keep him like a jewel, don't you?" Marchand's smile was strained. "He's useful," he said. Mr. Boudin swallowed. "I heard talk," he said, voice dropping, "that he's trouble." Genevieve stepped closer, eyes cold. "Talk is cheap," she said. Mr. Boudin's gaze flicked to her, then, by mistake, by reflex, back to Lucian. It happened in a blink. Lucian looked at him. Just a look. Mr. Boudin froze, mid-breath. His face lost color. His mouth opened. And then, to the shock of everyone present, the auction man took 2 steps backward as if pushed by an invisible hand. He stumbled. His heel caught on the edge of a stepping stone. He flailed, clumsy, panicked, and fell. Not dramatically, not with a crack you could hear, just down. His head struck the dirt hard enough to knock the air out of him. Men shouted. Someone rushed forward. Genevieve gasped. Marchand barked orders. And Lucian stood perfectly still, eyes lowered now as if he hadn't moved at all. Mr. Boudin lay on the ground, blinking rapidly, trying to speak. When he finally managed it, his voice came out ragged, terrified. He choked? "He told me!" Marchand leaned down, furious. "What did he tell you?" Mr. Boudin's eyes flicked wildly toward Lucian, then away again, as if Lucian's gaze might grab him. "He told me," Mr. Boudin whispered, "that the river remembers." The men around him went quiet. Because the river did remember. It remembered bodies dumped where no one could prove it. It remembered screams drowned out by water. It remembered names that never made it to church records. Mr. Boudin's hands shook. "He told me," he repeated, voice cracking, "that if I buy anyone today, I'll be buying my own grave. Genevieve's face twisted with rage. Lies, she snapped. He didn't say, but Mr. Boudin was already scrambling backward on his elbows, crab-like, trying to get away from Lucien without looking at him. I'm leaving, he wheezed. I'm leaving. Keep your curse. Keep your... Marchand surged forward, grabbing his arm. You will not embarrass me, Mr. Boudin screamed then. Not from pain, but from sheer panic, and wrenched free, stumbling toward his carriage. The crowd watched, stunned, as the auction man fled. Genevieve's breathing came fast, furious. Marchand's face darkened. Aurelia's eyes, wide, horrified, flicked toward Lucien. Lucien didn't look at her. He looked at the crowd, at the buyers, at the judge, at the men who thought they owned the world. He didn't smile. He only let his gaze rest on them long enough for them to feel it. Long enough for their comfort to crack. One of the buyers, a heavy-set man with mutton chops and a confident sneer, laughed too loudly, trying to break the tension. Superstitious fool, he scoffed. Ain't no slave's eyes gonna kill me. His friends chuckled, relieved. He took a step toward the line of enslaved people, reaching out as if selecting fruit. And then, absurdly, his gaze lifted, accidental, careless, and met Lucien's. Lucien's eyes held his. The man's grin faltered. He blinked, hard, as if something had gotten into his eye. He tried to laugh again, but his laugh caught. His face tightened. He turned away abruptly, shaking his head like a dog shaking off water. Heat, he muttered, wiping his brow. Just the heat. And yet his hands trembled. He didn't buy anyone that day. Neither did two of his friends, nor the judge, who stood stiffly, refusing to look anywhere near Lucien. The auction went on, but it went wrong, stuttering, faltering, men uncertain and angry. And in that uncertainty, I saw the real power of the myth. It wasn't that Lucien's glare stopped hearts. It stopped certainty. It made men hesitate, and in a world built on men never hesitating, even a half-second pause could become an opening. That night, the quarters hummed with something I hadn't felt there before. Not joy, not safety, but possibility. I saw it in the way people moved. Quick, purposeful, quiet. I saw Josiah passing something small from hand to hand. I saw Minta carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth, her face set. And when I glimpsed Lucien near the back of the big house, slipping through shadow, I realized something else. The glare was the story the masters told, but the real story was what happened while they were busy being afraid. After midnight, I heard the river. Not the gentle lapping you hear in daytime. A deeper sound. Oars. Soft splashes. A boat moving close. I crept to a window and peered out. In the dim moonlight, I saw silhouettes at the water's edge. Figures moving quickly. Bundles being carried. People, quiet, urgent, slipping into darkness like breath. An escape. My heart hammered so hard I thought the glass might rattle. Then, from the hallway, a sharp voice sliced the night. Where is he? Genevieve, angry, panicked. Footsteps followed. Marchand's heavier tread. I told you he was trouble, Genevieve hissed. Lower your voice, Marchand snapped. You think I don't know what's happening? Genevieve said, voice trembling with fury. My mirrors, my room, my house. And you let him, Aurelia's voice cut in, steady and cold. Mother. There was a pause. Then Genevieve spat. Don't mother me. You always look at me like you see through me. Aurelia's voice didn't waver. Maybe I do, she said. Marchand groaned. Enough, both of you. Genevieve's breath came fast. He's gone, she hissed. He's... A loud crash sounded downstairs. Then another. Shouts. Marchand swore and ran. Genevieve followed, skirts whispering like snakes. Aurelia's footsteps were slower, deliberate. I moved too, careful, silent, drawn toward the sound like a moth to flame. In the hallway, the mirror gallery door stood open. Inside, candlelight flickered wildly. Genevieve stood at the threshold, staring in horror. Marchand stood beside her, face pale. And inside the mirror gallery, every mirror had been turned. Not broken. Turned. All the reflective surfaces faced the wall now, showing nothing. As if someone had decided the house didn't deserve to see itself anymore. In the center of the room, on the floor, lay Genevieve's favorite mirror. Large, framed in gold, now laid flat like a grave marker. On its glass, someone had written in candle soot. Thick black strokes, messy but clear. Look away. Genevieve's hand flew to her mouth. Marchand's chest heaved. Aurelia stepped forward, eyes fixed on the message. Then slowly she glanced toward the hallway mirror outside the room. Lucien stood there. For the first time, he didn't hide. He didn't bow. He didn't pretend to be invisible. He stood straight, eyes bright in the candlelight, looking directly at Genevieve. Genevieve's breath caught. Her eyes lifted, against her will it seemed, and met his. I saw something shift in her face. Not fear of dying, fear of being exposed. Lucien spoke, quiet, calm. So calm it felt like the whole house leaned toward him. "You like mirrors," he said softly. Genevieve's lips trembled. What have you done?" she hissed. Lucien's gaze didn't waver. "I turned them," he said. "So you don't have to look." Genevieve's voice sharpened. "I'm not afraid of you." Lucien tilted his head slightly, as if considering her like a specimen. "No," he said. "You're afraid of what you see." Genevieve's face twisted. "Your property," she spat. "A thing." Lucien's eyes gleamed. And then he said the most shocking thing I'd heard a slave say in a white woman's house. He said simply, "Then why do you shake when I look at you?" Genevieve went still. The air felt thin. Marchand's hand twitched, as if he wanted to strike Lucien, but something held him back. Pride, fear. The eyes of his family, the eyes of his own house turned against him. Aurelia's face was tight, her eyes shining with something like grief. Lucien's gaze slid from Genevieve to Marchand. Marchand's face hardened. "Where are they?" he demanded. Lucien didn't answer. Marchand's voice rose, cracking. "Where are they going?" Lucien's eyes narrowed. Marchand took a step forward, rage pouring out now. "You think you can—" Lucien cut him off with a look. Not supernatural, not magical, just final. And Marchand stopped. He stopped the way a man stops when he walks too close to a cliff and realizes suddenly the ground has no obligation to hold him. Lucien's voice was quiet. "You taught me to be silent," he said. "So I listened." Marchand's breathing came fast. Lucien continued, voice steady. "You taught me to polish your mirrors," he said. "So I watched." Genevieve's eyes darted between them, panic rising. Aurelia whispered, "Broken." "Luce!" Lucien didn't look at her. He looked at Marchand. And then he said it. Two words that struck like a hammer. "I remember." Marchand's face drained of color. Genevieve whispered, barely audible, "Etienne." Marchand's lips moved soundlessly, like he was trying to swallow his own name. Lucien's gaze held him. And Marchand, wealthy, powerful owner of hundreds of lives, made a small, helpless sound. Not a scream, a whimper. Like a man who'd just realized the cage door was open, and he was the one inside. Then Marchand stumbled backward. His hand flew toward his chest, not as a performance, but as if his body had betrayed him. Genevieve reached out, startled. "Etienne!" Marchand tried to speak. His eyes, wide, wet, flicked toward the turned mirrors, toward the soot message, toward Lucien's steady gaze. Then he collapsed. Not dramatically, not with a flourish, just down, heavy, human, undone. Genevieve screamed. Aurelia dropped to her knees. Servants burst in, drawn by the sound, faces strained with fear. And Lucien stood over it all, still, quiet, watching, his eyes reflecting candlelight, like a blade reflecting sun. People would tell the story afterward, the way they always did. They'd say Lucian looked at Marchand, and Marchand fell dead, struck by a cursed glare. They'd say the beautiful slave killed his own master with his eyes. They'd say, "Don't look in his eyes," and laugh nervously like the phrase was protection. But I was there. I saw Marchand's face in that moment of collapse. It wasn't fear of death. It was fear of truth. And the truth, whatever it was, had finally found him. That was the night Belle-Rive began to burn. Not with fire at first, with panic, with men making mistakes, with women whose control cracked, with doors left unguarded because guards were busy whispering about eyes and curses. By dawn, 3 more enslaved people were gone from the quarters. By dusk, 5. And the next night, the river carried more shadows away. Geneviève tried to stop it. She ordered searches. She threatened punishment. She raged at Marchand's unconscious body as if his weakness offended her. A judge arrived, frowning, suspicious. A deputy came with a rifle, looking uneasy. And through it all, Lucian remained. He served. He cleaned. He polished nothing now because the mirrors had been turned. But he moved through the house like a quiet knife. Always watching, always listening, and never ever letting Geneviève forget that he could see her. Then the scandal broke. Not the whispered scandal of a pretty slave with dangerous eyes. A real scandal. Papers disappeared from Marchand's study. Documents that proved illegal sales, bribes, names that would pull powerful men down if they were ever seen by the wrong eyes. The judge's face turned pale when he realized what had been stolen. The deputy started drinking early. Geneviève locked herself in her room, only to emerge furious and shaking. Aurelia stopped playing piano. And in the town, the talk shifted. No longer a cursed slave. Now it was, the Marchands are finished. The river remembers. One afternoon, as clouds piled high and heavy, I found Aurelia in the library, staring at a turned mirror like she was trying to force it to reflect again. Her eyes were red. "I tried," she whispered. "Tried what?" I asked. Aurelia's voice broke. "To be different," she said. "To read books and think that made me clean." She swallowed hard. She couldn't say his name. She glanced toward the doorway as if afraid saying it would summon him. "He looked at me," she whispered, and I realized I've been watching suffering my whole life like it was weather. Something you can't change, so you just endure. Her hands trembled. "And now I can't endure it," she said. I didn't know what to say. Aurelia's gaze snapped to mine. "Do you think he hates me?" she asked. I hesitated. Aurelia's mouth tightened. "Don't lie," she snapped. "Don't do that soft thing where you make it sound gentle." I inhaled. "I think," I said slowly, "he doesn't have the luxury of hating you more than he needs to survive." Aurelia flinched, tears rising. "That's worse," she whispered. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Aurelia stiffened. Lucian entered the library quietly, carrying a stack of folded linens. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Aurelia at first. He moved to a side table, set the linens down, and turned to leave. Aurelia's voice cracked. "Luce!" Lucian stopped. Slowly he turned his head. His eyes met hers. Aurelia's breath hitched. Her fingers clenched on the arm of the chair. Lucian's expression was unreadable. Aurelia swallowed hard. Did you mean to kill him?" she whispered. Lucian's gaze held hers for a long moment. Then he spoke, voice low. "I didn't touch him," he said. Aurelia's throat worked. "But he fell," she whispered. Lucian's eyes didn't soften. "He was already falling," Lucian said quietly. Aurelia's eyes filled. "And my mother," she whispered. Why does she fear you?" Lucian's gaze slid briefly to the turned mirror in the corner, then back to Aurelia. "She knows," he said simply. "What she did." Aurelia's face went pale. "What did she do?" she whispered. Lucian didn't answer. Instead, he took one step closer. Just one. and lowered his voice so only Aurelia could hear. I caught only a fragment. The room upstairs. Aurelia's face crumpled. Her hand flew to her mouth as if to hold back a scream. Lucian stepped back, turning away again, as if the moment had never happened. He started to leave. Aurelia whispered, broken, "You're going to leave." Lucian paused. He didn't turn. But he spoke over his shoulder, voice steady. "Don't look at me like you didn't know," he said softly. Then he walked out. Aurelia stayed frozen, shaking. I felt my stomach twist, because whatever Lucian had just reminded her of, it wasn't rumor. It was history. It was something hidden in a house full of mirrors. Something people had tried to turn away from, thinking that if you don't look, it doesn't exist. But Lucian had spent his life polishing reflections. He had learned the cruelest truth of all. You can turn a mirror to the wall, but you can't erase what it has already seen. By the end of that week, Marchand was awake again, weak, furious, desperate, and he decided, like frightened men do, to make a spectacle. He accused Lucien publicly. He called the judge and the deputy and 3 neighboring planters and declared that Lucien was responsible for deaths, disappearances, theft. He claimed Lucien's eyes were a threat not just to Belle Reve, but to order itself. In short, he tried to turn a man into a monster, so the world would stop asking what kind of monster the world had already been. They set the hearing in the yard under a hot sun. Enslaved people were forced to stand at a distance watching. White men gathered in a loose semicircle, hands on canes and guns, faces tight with fear disguised as righteousness. Geneviève sat under a parasol, lips pressed thin, eyes bright. Aurelia stood behind her father, face pale as ash. Lucien was brought out without chains, but with 2 men flanking him, hands ready. Marchand's voice carried, loud, theatrical. "This slave," he declared, "has caused unrest, fear, and death." Murmurs rippled. Marchand pointed at Lucien. "He uses superstition," he said. "He uses his gaze to frighten men into accidents." A neighbor spat. "Should have sold him," he muttered. Marchand's eyes flashed. "I tried," he snapped. "But who will buy a curse?" The judge cleared his throat. "Etienne," he said stiffly, "you asked for authority. Evidence." Marchand's hands shook. "Evidence?" he snapped. "Look at him!" The deputy shifted uncomfortably. Genevieve's fingers tightened on her parasol handle until her knuckles went white. Marchand turned fully toward Lucien now, eyes blazing. "Do it!" he hissed under his breath, voice shaking. "Do your little trick. Look at us. Show them what you are." Lucien's face remained calm. He lifted his eyes slowly toward the semicircle of men. The air seemed to tighten. 1 man flinched and looked away. Another swallowed hard. The deputy's grip tightened on his rifle. The judge's mouth went dry. Lucien's gaze moved over them, steady, unhurried, like a lantern beam sweeping across a dark room. Then Lucien stopped, his eyes locking onto Marchand. Marchand's breath hitched. For a heartbeat, the mighty planter looked like a boy caught stealing. Lucien spoke. His voice was calm, not loud, but it carried anyway, because everyone was listening with the fear of people who suspect the truth is about to be spoken. "I don't kill with my eyes," Lucien said. Murmurs rippled. Marchand spat. "Liar!" Lucien's gaze didn't waver. "But when I look at you," he continued, voice steady, "you remember what you did." The yard went silent. Genevieve's parasol trembled. Aurelia's hand flew to her throat. Marchand's face twisted with rage. "Stop!" he hissed. "Stop!" Lucien kept speaking, voice calm as river water. "You remember the names," he said softly. "The ones you sold quiet. The ones you hid from the city yard. The ones you told yourself don't count if nobody writes them down." Marchand's face drained. The judge stiffened. "Etienne!" he snapped. "What is he saying?" Marchand lunged forward half a step. "He's lying!" he roared. He's... Lucien's gaze slid to Geneviève. Genevieve's breath caught. Lucian's voice remained even. "And you," he said softly, "remember the room upstairs." Genevieve made a sound. Small. Broken. Aurelia stumbled backward, eyes wide. The neighbor planters shifted, suddenly uneasy. The deputy's rifle dipped slightly. The judge's face went hard. "What room?" he demanded. Marchand's voice cracked. "Enough!" he screamed. "Enough! He's trying to curse you." Lucian's gaze returned to the judge. His eyes held steady. And then he did something no one expected. He looked at the turned mirrors lining the veranda behind the white men. Mirrors still facing the wall. He lifted his chin slightly. It was such a small movement. Such a simple gesture. But Josiah, standing far back among the enslaved, saw it. Minta saw it. The older woman with the headscarf saw it. And in that instant, the yard shifted. Not with visible violence, with motion. A distraction here, a shout there. A sudden commotion near the horses as one of them reared nervously, spooked by something unseen. White men cursed, turning their heads. The deputy stumbled. The judge barked orders. And in that chaos, brief, precious, Lucian moved. Not running wildly, not panicking. He slipped, swift and controlled, between bodies, toward the side path that led down to the river. A planter reached for him, but hesitated, eyes flicking nervously toward Lucian's face. Lucian didn't even look back. He vanished into the heat shimmer like a mirage, solid enough to cut you. Marchand screamed and surged after him. Genevieve shrieked. Aurelia called out, "Luce!" But Lucian was already gone. And the myth, that he killed with a glare, became in that moment something sharper than fear. A doorway. Because if the beautiful slave with the dangerous eyes could slip away right under their noses, then maybe others could too. That night the river carried more shadows. And this time, the white men were too busy searching the woods and cursing mirrors to notice how many disappeared. I never saw Lucian again. Not directly. Not as a man standing in a doorway, lamplight catching in his eyes. But I saw his effect. Weeks later, a packet arrived at my paper in New Orleans. No name, no return. Inside were pages, stolen documents, dirty at the edges, smelling faintly of river water and smoke, lists of sales, bribes, names of judges and planters, and auction men. No poetic curse, just proof. And tucked between the pages, a small scrap of paper with a single sentence written in careful, unfamiliar handwriting. Someone else's hand, not Lucian's, but I knew the voice behind it. Write what they don't want seen. The scandal hit like a storm. Men who'd laughed at the rumor of a killing glare suddenly stopped laughing when their names appeared in print, beside crimes they couldn't polish away. Belle Reve fell apart. Marchand fled south for a time, then tried to return as if nothing had happened, only to find doors closed. Genevieve vanished from society. Not dead, not jailed, just gone, like a reflection turned to the wall. Aurelia, they said, never married. Some claimed it was grief. Others claimed she'd seen something she couldn't unsee. Years later, long after the country cracked open into war, I stood by the river again. The water moved slow and brown, heavy with memory. A man approached from the shadows of the trees, older now, leaner, posture different. He wore simple clothes, no waistcoat, no servant's polish, no master's display. He stopped a few paces away, not too close. The light was low. I couldn't swear it was him, but when he lifted his eyes, the spark was there, brief, sharp, like a blade catching sun. My breath caught. I didn't look away. The man studied me for a long moment, then nodded once as if acknowledging something that needed no words. Then he turned and walked into the dark, disappearing like a secret set free. I stood there shaking, not from fear of dying, but from the weight of being seen. And I finally understood why the phrase had spread so fast, why it had burrowed into people's mouths like a prayer. Don't look in his eyes was never really about a curse. It was about accountability. Because if you looked into Lucian's eyes, if you truly met them, you risked seeing yourself without the stories you told to make your cruelty sound like order. And some people, when faced with that reflection, couldn't survive it. That's the truth of the beautiful slave who killed with a glare. He didn't kill with magic. He killed lies by looking straight through them. And in a world built on lies, that can feel like death. I told you I never saw Lucian again. That's not quite true. What I meant, what I wanted to mean, was that I never saw him again as their Lucian, the polished one. The one folded into a waistcoat and made to pour brandy like he couldn't hear the screams travel through the walls. But the river gave me a different version years later, and his eyes, those same eyes, were the only proof I needed that the rumor had always been a lie, wrapped around a truth too dangerous to say plainly. After that night by the water, I went home and I sat at my desk with a blank page and a shaking hand, and I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. I'd already written the safe version. Now I had to write the real one, because the real story wasn't that he killed with a glare. The real story was that he learned to aim a look the way other men aimed a gun, quietly, precisely, and only when the target had already decided to die rather than be seen. And if you want to understand why "Don't Look in His Eyes" spread like wildfire, you have to understand what Belle Reve was hiding upstairs, not under the floorboards, not in the cellar. Upstairs, behind silk and perfume and mirrors that were always angled just so. The room upstairs wasn't a metaphor. It was a place. It existed, and it was the reason Geneviève shook when Lucian looked at her. I didn't discover it immediately. No one does. Not in a house designed to keep its sins padded and quiet. I discovered it the way most terrible things are discovered, by accident because someone panicked and made a mistake. It happened the afternoon after Lucian escaped the yard. Marchand had men riding out in every direction, barking orders, threatening everyone in reach. He was desperate in a way I'd never seen a rich man be, because rich men are used to thinking panic is for other people. Geneviève was worse. She paced the veranda like a caged animal, her parasol forgotten, hair loosening from its pins. Every few minutes, she snapped at a servant, as if cruelty could rebuild control. Aurelia stayed mostly silent, but her silence was loud, like a piano string held too tight, ready to snap. And then Geneviève ordered the mirrors turned back, every single one. It was a frantic command, irrational and revealing. "Turn them," she hissed. "I won't have my house blind." I watched servants obey with hands that trembled. Mirrors swung, glass catching light, reflections leaping back into the rooms like unwanted guests. When the mirror in the hall outside Genevieve's suite was turned, it briefly showed the upstairs landing behind her, an angle that shouldn't have been visible from where she stood. And in that reflection, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A narrow seam in the wall. Not a door seam. Too thin, too clean. A panel. A hidden panel, disguised in the woodwork beside the wardrobe. The reflection caught it for only a second before a servant's body blocked the view. But it was enough, because Geneviève saw it too. Her eyes snapped to the mirror, then to the wall, then back again. She went pale. And in that moment, I understood she hadn't ordered the mirrors turned back because she wanted to see herself. She'd ordered them turned because she wanted to see if anyone else could see what she'd been hiding. That night, long after the household exhausted itself with searching and shouting, I did something I should not have done. I went upstairs. I didn't go like a hero. I went like a thief. Barefoot, silent, heart pounding so hard I could taste copper. I carried no lamp, only the faint spill of moonlight from windows, because light makes you visible, and visibility was a death sentence in that house. Genevieve's suite door stood shut. A guard, one of Marchand's men, stood down the hall, but he was leaning against the wall, head tipped back, eyes heavy. He'd been drinking from a flask, and desperation makes men careless. I waited until his breathing went deep. Then I slid forward, one slow step at a time, until I reached the mirror outside Genevieve's door. In the glass, I saw myself, pale, wide-eyed, and behind me, the hallway stretching like a throat. I didn't look long. I turned my head slightly, searching the reflection for that seam. There, a thin line in the paneling near the wardrobe, exactly where the mirror's angle made it obvious. I moved to the wall and pressed my fingers along the carved wood. At first it felt solid. Then my fingertip found a slight give, barely there. A latch disguised as decoration. My throat tightened. I pressed. The panel released with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the panel shifted outward an inch, exhaling cold air. I pulled it open just enough to slip inside. The space behind it wasn't a closet. It was a passage. Tight, narrow, lined with rough wood that didn't match the polished walls of the big house. Whoever built it hadn't built it to be pretty. They'd built it to be hidden. The air smelled stale, old fabric, old fear. I inched forward, palm sliding along the wood, until the passage opened into a small room. No window. A single candle stub on the floor, burned down to almost nothing. A bucket in the corner. And on a narrow pallet of thin bedding, a boy sat upright, staring at me. He was maybe 12, maybe 13. Skinny in a way that made his joints look too large. His hair was dark and curled tight. His skin was light brown. Too light to be ignored. Too dark to be claimed in the way white families claim their own. His eyes were wide and dry, not tearful, like he'd already run out of tears long ago. He didn't scream. He didn't move. He just watched me, as if he'd been expecting a stranger to arrive eventually. I tried to speak and nothing came out. Finally I managed, "Who are you?" The boy's voice was hoarse, as if he didn't use it much. "Henny," he whispered. "Henri." My stomach twisted, because I'd heard that name once, months earlier, in a careless murmur from a servant who thought no one listened. A name spoken like a curse and then swallowed. Henri. The hidden one. The shame. The reason Genevieve's hands trembled when Lucien looked at her. Henry stared at me, unblinking. "You with her?" he asked. "No," I whispered quickly. "No, I'm not." His eyes narrowed. "You with him?" he asked. My breath caught. "Him," I repeated softly. Henry's throat worked. "The man," he whispered. "The one with the eyes." A chill ran through me. "You know Lucien?" I asked. Henry's gaze dropped, then lifted again, stubborn. "He come," he whispered. "Sometimes. He bring bread. He bring water. He say, 'Don't be scared of mirrors. Mirrors can't bite.'" My mouth went dry. Henry continued, voice very small. "He say one day the river gonna take me," he whispered. "He say one day I gonna see the sky, and it won't be through a crack." Something inside my chest tightened so hard it hurt. "How long have you been here?" I whispered. Henry's eyes shifted slightly, calculating. "Long," he said. "Since I was little." My hands clenched. "Who put you here?" I asked, though I already knew. Henry didn't answer with a name. He only said, "She don't like to look at me." The candle stub flickered, as if the air itself flinched. A sound came from the hallway outside, soft, distant but real. A floorboard creak. My blood turned cold. Henry's eyes widened. "She coming," he whispered. I grabbed the edge of the panel, heart hammering. Henry reached out suddenly and caught my sleeve. Small hand, surprisingly strong. "Tell him," he whispered, frantic. "Tell Eisman. Tell him she say she gonna move me. She say she gonna bury me somewhere. Nobody can—" His words cut off as footsteps approached. I squeezed his hand once, hard, and whispered, "I will." Then I slipped back into the passage, pulling the panel shut behind me, easing it until it clicked into place. I turned and pressed myself against the wall just as Genevieve's door opened. She stepped out, candle in hand, her face tight and pale. For a heartbeat, her gaze swept the hallway. Then it landed on the mirror. And because mirrors are cruel, it reflected her face from an angle she didn't like, showing the underside of her fear. Her eyes narrowed. She moved closer to the paneling beside her wardrobe, fingers brushing the carved wood, checking if the world had seen. When her hand found everything flush, everything hidden again, she exhaled shakily. Then she whispered, not prayer, not comfort, an ugly little confession meant only for herself. He won't take him. I didn't breathe until she retreated into her room and shut the door. I crept back to my own quarters with sweat running cold down my spine, my mind roaring with one terrible understanding after another. That boy was not just hidden. He was evidence. He was living proof of what Belle-Reve did behind closed doors. Proof that could ruin Marchand's name, Genevieve's standing, Aurelia's prospects. Proof that would make the polite world recoil, even as it pretended not to understand why. And Lucien knew. Of course he knew, because Lucien was the only person in that house who could move everywhere and be ignored. He could carry trays into rooms where men signed papers. He could stand behind Genevieve while she stared at her own reflection and thought her thoughts were private. He could polish mirrors and learn every crack. He could watch a lie from every angle. The next morning, I went to the quarters at dawn and found Josiah by the woodpile, already working. I didn't waste words. Henri, I whispered. Josiah's hands froze, his eyes lifted, sharp. You seen him, Josiah said, not asking. Yes? Josiah's jaw tightened. He glanced around quickly. You ain't supposed to, he muttered. He says Genevieve plans to move him, I said, to bury him somewhere. Josiah's eyes darkened. He spat into the dirt. She would, he said flatly. How do I tell Lucien? I asked. Josiah's mouth twisted. You don't, he said. Not out loud. He leaned closer, voice low. You right? He asked. Yes. Josiah shoved a small scrap of wood into my hand. On it was a rough carving. Just a simple shape, like a crescent in a line. What is this? I whispered. Josiah's eyes flicked toward the big house. Mirror mark, he muttered. You put it where eyes man can see. He'll know. My throat tightened. Where do I put it? Josiah's gaze held mine, hard. In the mirror gallery, he said, where she can't stop him from looking. I swallowed. Josiah's voice dropped further. And don't go thinking he's safe, he added. He ain't. He just dangerous in a way they don't understand. I looked down at the carved scrap, my hands shaking. That night, I slipped into the mirror gallery again. The room felt different now that the mirrors had been turned back. They reflected too much. Every angle, every movement, every nervous breath. It was like standing inside an eye. I set the carved scrap at the base of Genevieve's favorite mirror, angled so the glass would catch it. Then I backed away, heart pounding. As I turned to leave, a reflection shifted. Lucien stood behind me, close enough that I could see the faint sheen of sweat at his temple. I spun. He was real. He didn't speak at first. His gaze dropped to the carving. His face didn't change, but his eyes sharpened like a blade finding its edge. You saw him, he said quietly. I nodded, throat tight. Lucien's gaze lifted to mine. Steady, direct. For the first time, I saw something beneath his calm. Not anger, not panic, but a cold, controlled urgency. She's going to move him, I whispered. Lucien's jaw tightened once. Barely a twitch. How long? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. Lucien's eyes flicked across the mirrors, as if calculating routes in a map only he could see. Then he looked back at me and said something that made my stomach drop. You can't write this yet. I stared. What? Lucien's voice remained low. If you print Henry's name, he said, They will kill him before dawn. My mouth went dry. Lucian stepped closer, his voice steady but sharp. You want to help? He asked. Yes, I breathed. Lucian's gaze held mine. Then you write what they already afraid of, he said. You write the judge's name, the auction man's name, the lawyer's name. You make them look at themselves. My pulse hammered. And Henri? Lucian's eyes went hard. Henri comes with the river, he said simply. A sound came from the hallway. Footsteps. Lucian's head snapped slightly, listening. He leaned in and murmured, so quiet it barely moved the air. Don't look in my eyes unless you can carry it. Then he was gone, slipping away between reflections, vanishing as if the mirrors had swallowed him. I stood there shaking, trying to understand the shape of what I'd stepped into. I had come to Belle Reve for a rumor. Now I was part of a plan, and the plan moved fast. The following days were a blur of tension and near misses. Geneviève became feral. She kept servants close, eyes darting. She ordered doors locked that had never been locked. She started sleeping with a small pistol under her pillow, an absurd little piece of metal she thought could protect her from being known. Marchand, humiliated by Lucian's escape, grew crueler. He took it out on the people he could still reach, those who hadn't slipped to the river yet. Aurelia changed in a way I can't describe politely. She started walking through the house like a woman haunted, not by ghosts, but by memory. She stopped using her fan. She stopped performing gentility. She looked older in a matter of days. One evening, she cornered me in the hallway near the library. You saw him, she whispered. I hesitated. Aurelia's eyes flashed. Don't lie, she snapped. Everyone lies in this house, and I'm sick of it. I swallowed. Yes, I admitted. I saw Lucian. Aurelia's throat worked. Is he? She started, then stopped, her voice breaking. Is he coming back? I didn't know what to say. Aurelia stepped closer, her voice dropping. My mother is moving something, she whispered. She's moving him. My stomach clenched. Henri, I whispered. Aurelia flinched at the name like it was a slap. Her eyes filled. I didn't, she whispered. Then her jaw tightened with fury at herself. I did know, she admitted. I always knew. I just pretended it was a story that didn't belong to me. She grabbed my sleeve. If Lucian takes him, she whispered frantic, my mother will burn the house down before she lets the world see. I stared. Burn it down? Aurelia's mouth twisted. She loves mirrors, she said, voice shaking. She loves her reflection more than any soul in this place. If she thinks she's losing control of what people see, she'll scorch the whole world to keep it from looking. That night, Geneviève moved Henri. She didn't march him out openly. She did it the way cowards do cruelty. Quiet. At an hour when the people you're hurting are too tired to fight. Near midnight, I heard a soft scraping sound upstairs, a panel shifting, then muffled footsteps, then a whisper. Henri's, thin and terrified. No, he breathed. No, please. A sharp hiss cut him off. Quiet, Genevieve's voice snapped, low and furious. You ruin everything just by breathing. My blood turned cold. I slipped into the hallway and pressed myself against the wall, listening. I heard the panel close again. Then Genevieve's footsteps moved, fast, controlled, toward the stairs that led down to the back passage. She was taking him out of the hidden room. Not to freedom, to disappearance. I didn't think. I moved. I went down the servants' stairwell, silent as I could, and followed the sound of Genevieve's shoes through the back corridor. She reached the kitchen. A lantern was lit low. 2 men waited there, hired hands, faces hard, eyes averted. They weren't looking at Geneviève. Men like that didn't like seeing a well-dressed woman do ugly things. It made them feel less clean. Between them stood Henri, barefoot, trembling, his eyes huge. Geneviève gripped his arm so hard her fingers left pale marks. Take him, she hissed. One of the men hesitated. Where? He muttered. Genevieve's eyes flashed. To the old smokehouse, she snapped. And then to the river road. There's a cart. Henri's breath came in quick, panicked bursts. "Aurelia!" he whispered, voice cracking. "Aurelia!" Genevieve's face twisted. "Don't speak her name," she hissed, as if the sound offended her. Henri looked around wildly, eyes searching for mercy. His gaze lifted, and for one heartbeat, it landed on me, hidden in shadow behind the pantry door. Our eyes met. In that instant, I saw it clearly. He wasn't just scared. He was already half-trained in the same language Lucian spoke. He looked at me like a signal, like a desperate plea flung through a crack. I swallowed hard. Then, without thinking, I did the only thing I could. I stepped out. Genevieve spun, startled. "What are you doing?" she snapped. My voice came out hoarse. "He's sick," I blurted. It was a foolish lie, a dangerous one. Genevieve's eyes narrowed. "He's fine," she hissed. "He's always been fine. He's just—" She stopped herself, lips trembling with rage. I kept my face blank, though my heart hammered. "He's shaking," I said, forcing steadiness. "If you take him out in the night air—" Genevieve took a step toward me, candlelight flashing in her eyes. "You," she said softly, "are a guest, not a doctor, not family, not anything." Her gaze flicked to Henri, then back to me. "You want to be helpful?" she whispered. "Go back to bed and forget what you saw." Henri's breath hitched. One of the hired men shifted, uncomfortable. Genevieve's smile sharpened. "Unless," she murmured, "you'd like to join him in being forgotten." My throat tightened. Then, from the doorway behind Genevieve, a voice spoke, low, steady, "Let him go." Everyone froze. Genevieve's face went white. The hired men jerked, startled, hands moving instinctively. Henry's eyes widened. Aurelia stepped into the lantern light. Her hair was loose, her face pale, her eyes burning with something like clarity. Genevieve's voice cracked. "Aurelia!" she hissed. "Get back upstairs." Aurelia didn't move. She looked at Henri, her gaze softening for a heartbeat, then back at Genevieve. "No," she said quietly. Genevieve's lips trembled. "You don't understand." "I understand," Aurelia cut in, voice sharp. "I understand you have been hiding him like a stain." Henri made a small sound, like a sob swallowed. Genevieve's eyes flashed, furious. "He is not. He is a child," Aurelia snapped, voice cracking. "And you're dragging him out like a sack of rot." One of the hired men cleared his throat, shifting. "Ma'am," he muttered, uneasy. "We just doing—" "Shut up," Genevieve hissed, whirling on him. "You do what you're paid to do." Then she turned back to Aurelia, voice suddenly sweet and poisonous. "You think you're rescuing him?" she whispered. "You think you're clean now?" Aurelia's jaw clenched. "I don't care about clean," she said. "I care about stopping you." Genevieve's eyes narrowed to slits. For a moment she looked less like a lady and more like something sharp-edged and starving. Then she smiled. It was the worst expression I'd seen on any face in that house. "All right," she murmured softly. "Take him." Henri's breath caught in relief, too quick, too hopeful. Aurelia stepped forward, reaching for him. Genevieve's hand shot out and seized Henri's chin, forcing his face up. Henri flinched, eyes wide. Genevieve stared into his eyes, her smile trembling. Then she whispered, so quiet only the nearest could hear, "You'll ruin her." Aurelia stiffened. "Mother?" Genevieve released Henri with a shove. "Go then," she hissed. "Run off with your little proof. Let the world look. Let them stare. Let them whisper. Let them turn you into a scandal." Aurelia's breathing came hard. She grabbed Henri's hand. "Come," she whispered urgently. Henri stumbled toward her, trembling. And then Genevieve did the thing Aurelia had feared. She lifted her candle, eyes wild. "If my house can't be seen the way I want," she whispered, voice cracking, "then it won't be seen at all." She hurled the candle into the kitchen curtains. Flame leapt instantly, hungry, bright. Someone shouted. The hired men swore, backing away. Smoke billowed. Aurelia yanked Henri toward the back door. I lunged after them. Behind us, Genevieve stood in the growing firelight, her face lit like a saint in a nightmare, whispering fiercely, "Don't look! Don't look!" Don't look! As if the flames were mirrors and she was trying to turn them away. We burst out into the night air, coughing, hearts pounding. Aurelia pulled Henry into the shadow of the orchard, moving fast. "Where?" I gasped. Aurelia's voice shook. "The river!" she snapped. Henry stumbled barefoot on dirt, trembling. Aurelia's grip on his hand was iron. We ran through rows of trees, smoke rising behind us, light flickering in the sky as the kitchen caught and the fire found more to eat. Shouts erupted behind. Men scrambling, confused, frightened. Aurelia whispered, harsh and urgent, "Lucian! Lucian said the river remembers." My throat tightened. "Where is he?" I wheezed. Aurelia's eyes flashed. "He'll be there," she said, as if it was faith, not knowledge. The orchard opened onto the back path. We sprinted toward the riverbank, branches whipping our faces. And then, there in the moonlight, I saw him. Lucian stood at the water's edge with a small boat, half hidden in reeds. Josiah and Minta were there too, moving quickly, loading bundles, helping others into the boat, shadows slipping into the river's mouth like swallowed breath. Lucian's head snapped up as we approached. His eyes landed on Henry. For the first time, his control cracked just enough to show something underneath, something raw and real. Henry made a small, broken sound. "Eyes, man," he whispered. Lucian stepped forward and grabbed Henry's shoulders, steadying him. "You're coming," Lucian said, voice tight. Henry nodded frantically, tears finally spilling. Aurelia stood frozen, breathing hard. Lucian's gaze lifted to her. Their eyes met. The air felt taut. Aurelia swallowed, voice trembling. "I brought him," she whispered. Lucian didn't thank her. He didn't soften. He only looked at her the way he looked at everyone, like he could see straight through the stories. Aurelia's voice cracked. "I tried," she whispered. "I tried to stop her." Lucian's gaze didn't waver. "She still burned it," he said quietly. Aurelia flinched. Lucian's eyes flicked past her, to the glow in the distance where fire climbed into the big house's hungry bones. Then his gaze returned to Aurelia. "You want to do one good thing?" he asked softly. Aurelia nodded, shaking. Lucian's voice dropped. "Look away," he said. Aurelia blinked, confused. Lucian's eyes held hers. "Look away from the house," he said quietly. "Don't watch it burn like it's a story. Walk away like it's a lie." Aurelia's face crumpled. Then she turned her head slowly away from the flames. Henry clung to Lucian's shirt, sobbing silently. Lucian lifted Henry into the boat. Steady hands, urgent movements. Josiah hissed, "They coming!" Minta's eyes flashed. "Hush!" she muttered. "Move!" More figures slipped out of the trees. 2 women with bundles, a man limping, a girl carrying a baby close. Lucian grabbed an oar, eyes scanning the bank. Aurelia stood there, trembling, hands empty, the river wind tangling her loose hair. I stared at her, stunned. "Are you—" I started. Aurelia swallowed hard. "I can't go," she whispered. "They'll hunt me. They'll—" Lucian's head snapped toward me. His gaze hit me like a shove. "You!" he said sharply. I froze. Lucian's eyes burned. "You print," he said. "You make men's names stick." I swallowed, nodding. Lucian's voice dropped. "Then make hers stick," he said softly. I blinked. "What?" Lucian's gaze flicked to Aurelia, then back to me. "If she stays," Lucian said, voice hard, "she'll get swallowed and turned into a polite lie. She'll marry and smile and pretend Henry was never real." Aurelia flinched, tears spilling. Lucian didn't soften. "Or," he continued, eyes locked on mine, "you write her truth before they write it for her." My throat tightened. Aurelia whispered, broken, "Luce?" Lucian looked at her then, just briefly. In that look there was no romance, no softness, no fantasy, only a brutal honesty between 2 people tied together by a house that had fed on both of them in different ways. "You don't owe me," Lucian said quietly. "You owe him." He nodded toward Henri. Henri looked up, eyes wet, trembling. Aurelia's chest hitched. She stepped forward suddenly and pressed something into Henri's hand, a small silver locket. Henri stared at it, confused. Aurelia's voice broke. "It was my grandmother's," she whispered. It's not enough." Henri's fingers curled around it like it might anchor him. Aurelia stepped back, swallowing hard. Then she did something I'll never forget. She looked at Lucien again, fully without flinching. And for a heartbeat, she didn't look like a Marchand daughter. She looked like a human being stripped bare. "Don't die," she whispered. Lucien didn't promise. He only nodded once, controlled, and turned away. The boat pushed off. Oars dipped, water swallowed sound, and the river carried them into darkness. Behind us, the plantation roared with fire and shouting. Somewhere along the bank, a rifle cracked. A splash erupted too close. Someone screamed. Lucien's head lifted, eyes scanning, jaw tight. He didn't look back at the house. He looked forward, into the dark, like a man who decided fear was no longer allowed to steer. That was the moment the rumor was born in its final form. Because when they found the kitchen burned, and the servants missing, and the hidden panel open upstairs with nothing inside it but a thin pallet and a bucket, the white world did what it always does when it glimpses its own ugliness. It invented a monster to blame. They said Lucien bewitched the mistress. They said he glared and she went mad and burned her own curtains. They said he stared at Marchand and made his heart fail. They said he looked at the auction man and cursed him. They said, "Don't look in his eyes," because saying that was easier than saying, "Don't do things you'd be ashamed to have seen." And the people who knew the truth, the ones who had oars in their hands and river water on their ankles, let the lie live. Because sometimes a lie is the only shield you can raise. After the fire, Belle Rive didn't die quickly. It rotted. Marchand survived, but he was never the same. His pride had been punctured, and pride leaks poison. Genevieve survived too. Burned only slightly, enough to make her furious at the world for daring to scar her. She told everyone the fire was an accident caused by incompetent servants, and she wept prettily in church, and she blamed superstition and savages and anything that kept the mirror turned away from her. Aurelia disappeared from the public eye for weeks. When she returned, she did it like a ghost. And then the papers began to move. That was Lucien's real weapon. Not his eyes. The paper. He couldn't read. Not in the way I could, but he could memorize shapes. He could recognize a signature the way a musician recognizes a melody. He could remember where a document sat on a desk, how long a man's hand hovered before signing, how a judge's mouth tightened when he saw a name. He had spent years polishing mirrors and watching men in reflections. He knew who lied without blinking. He knew who flinched when a name was spoken. So he didn't need to read words. He needed to recognize patterns. And he needed one person, me, to turn those patterns into ink that would bite. That's why the packet arrived at my paper. But what I didn't tell you earlier, the part I'm telling now, is how it arrived. It wasn't mailed. It was delivered. By a woman who walked into my print shop one humid afternoon wearing plain clothes and a headscarf pulled low. She set the bundle down on my work table like it weighed nothing. When I looked up to thank her, she didn't meet my eyes. "You Jonah Pike?" she asked, voice low. "Yes," I said, wary. She nodded once. "He say you can be trusted," she murmured. My throat tightened. "Lucien?" I whispered. She didn't answer the name. She only slid a small object across the table. A carved scrap of wood, a crescent and a line. My hands went cold. She leaned closer. Voice barely above breath. "You print," she said. "You print now." Then she turned and walked out before I could ask a single question. When I opened the bundle, I felt sick. Because it wasn't just evidence of illegal sales. It was evidence of something worse. It was names of men who paid for silence, names of women who ordered people hidden, a list of debts that weren't money. And in the middle of it, pressed between two folded pages, was a small torn piece of cloth, thin cotton, old. On it, stitched in careful thread, were two letters, H.M. Henri Marchand, a name stitched like a claim, like proof that the hidden boy had been real, had been held, had been fed just enough to keep him alive, and had been denied the sky. Lucien hadn't taken Henri just to save a child. He'd taken the proof that could tear Belle-Rive apart from the inside. I printed what I could without getting myself killed immediately. I chose names that mattered most. The judge first, because once a judge's hands are dirty in public, the whole town has to pretend to care. The lawyer's associates, the auction yard's private ledger, the quiet route Marchand used to move people without city eyes. And yes, I printed whispers of the upstairs room without naming Henri outright, enough to make people ask, not enough to give Geneviève a target. The reaction was swift, not righteous, not clean. Swift like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Men demanded retractions, men threatened lawsuits, men threatened violence with no pretense. One evening, my shop window shattered from a brick, thrown hard enough to sound like a gunshot. Another night, I found a dead rat pinned to my door with a note that read, in crude scrawl, "Stop looking." And that's when I understood the final shape of Lucien's glare. It wasn't a magic beam that stopped hearts. It was the act of looking, of refusing to look away, that made powerful people reckless. When people believe they've been seen, they do desperate things. They silence witnesses. They destroy paper. They burn houses. They kill themselves with panic and call it fate. That's how the deaths kept happening even after Lucien vanished. Mr. Kells, the lawyer, hadn't died because Lucien's eyes were cursed. He died because he realized a slave could ruin him with the truth, and men like Kells would rather fall apart than be exposed. Overseer Haskins hadn't died because Lucien stared too hard. He died because he'd done things he couldn't survive being forced to remember, and because he underestimated how fast fear can turn your own body against you. Mr. Boudin hadn't collapsed because of a spell. He collapsed because he recognized in Lucien's calm gaze the possibility that someone had been quietly recording his sins all along. One look didn't kill them. One look made them understand they weren't invisible. And invisibility is the only comfort a cruel man truly has. Years later, when the war came and the old world started cracking open, I learned more, pieces drifting back down the river like debris. I learned Henri survived. I learned he traveled under a different name for a while, because names in that country could get you killed faster than bullets. I learned Lucien traveled too, moving like a shadow through towns where everyone swore they'd seen a beautiful man with dangerous eyes. Sometimes he was described as a devil, sometimes as an angel, sometimes as a rumor in a bar. And always, always, the phrase followed him like a curse the guilty cast on themselves. Don't look in his eyes, because as long as you told yourself his eyes were the danger, you didn't have to admit the danger was what you'd done. I saw Geneviève once more. Years after Belle-Rive fell apart, she was in New Orleans, dressed in black, her hair pinned tight, her face lined with bitterness. She stepped into my shop without invitation, her perfume still cloying, still suffocating. Her eyes flicked around the room, landing on mirrors I kept near the typesetting table. Practical ones, not decorative. Her mouth tightened. "You," she said softly, voice venomous. I didn't greet her. I didn't offer her a chair. Genevieve's gaze landed on a stack of old printed pages. "You ruined us," she whispered. I stared back, steady. "No," I said quietly. "You did." Her jaw clenched. "You think you're righteous," she hissed. "You think ink makes you clean." "I don't think I'm clean," I replied. "I think you're afraid." Geneviève flinched. For a heartbeat, her eyes darted to the mirror, checking the angle, checking what it showed. She swallowed hard, then she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a tremble of fury. "Where is he?" she whispered. I didn't answer. Genevieve's lips trembled. "Where's the boy?" she hissed. I held her gaze. Genevieve's face twisted. "He's dead!" she spat, suddenly desperate. He must be! He must be!" "No," I said softly. The word hit her like a slap. Genevieve went still. Her breathing quickened. Her eyes flicked uncontrollably toward the mirror again. And in that moment, I saw exactly why Lucian's gaze had power over her. Because Genevieve lived by controlling what people saw. And mirrors, real mirrors, not polite social ones, were her enemy. She whispered, cracked, "He'll come back." I didn't deny it. Genevieve straightened suddenly, rage returning like armor. "If he comes," she hissed, "tell him to keep his eyes to himself." I almost laughed. Instead, I said, "That's the problem, Mrs. Marchand." Genevieve's eyes narrowed. "You never wanted his eyes," I continued quietly. "You wanted your secrets to stay invisible." Genevieve's face went pale. Then she turned and left as abruptly as she'd come, her skirts whispering, her posture rigid, her fear dragging behind her like a shadow. That was the last time I saw her. They say she died in a fever some years later. They say she called for mirrors in her final days, demanded to see herself, demanded to prove she was still there. I don't know if that's true. I only know this. Some people spend their whole lives polishing a reflection until it's smooth enough to lie. And then they panic when someone looks too closely. As for Aurelia wrote me one letter. One. It arrived without return address, folded carefully, the paper thick and expensive. Her handwriting was neat. Her words were not. She didn't apologize the way people apologize to feel better about themselves. She didn't ask for forgiveness she hadn't earned. She wrote only this: "I still see him when I close my eyes, not his face, the way he looked at us like we were already guilty. I used to think that kind of looking was cruelty. Now I think it was the first honest thing anyone ever gave me." At the bottom, she added, "I turned the mirrors to the wall in my own house. I can't bear the lie of them anymore." No signature. Just a pressed violet, dried and brittle, tucked into the fold like a memory that would crumble if handled too roughly. And Henri? I met Henri once, though I didn't know it at the time. It was in a crowded market in Baton Rouge years after the war had begun, when everything was unstable, and people moved like they were afraid of being recognized. A young man bumped my shoulder, murmured an apology, and kept walking. As he passed, something slipped into my pocket, a small silver locket. I froze. I turned, scanning the crowd. The young man didn't look back, but he lifted his hand briefly, 2 fingers touching his brow, a gesture so subtle it could have been nothing. Except it wasn't nothing. It was acknowledgement, a signal. And when the crowd shifted and I caught a glimpse of his face again, I saw his eyes. Not Lucian's eyes exactly, but something in them. A steadiness, a refusal to flinch. A look that said, "I'm still here. You can't turn me into a secret again." Later, when I opened the locket, there was a tiny painted portrait inside. Aurelia, as a young woman, stiff and beautiful. And beside it, a scrap of cloth stitched with H.M. Henri Marchand, a name reclaimed. A scandal turned into survival. So, did Lucian kill with a glare? If you mean, did men die after looking into his eyes? Yes, they did. But not because his eyes were a weapon in the way people wanted to believe. They died because his eyes were a mirror they couldn't turn away from. A glare is just a look with intention. Lucian's intention was simple and terrifying: to make the world see what it kept trying not to see. And for men who built their lives on invisibility, on hidden rooms, hidden papers, hidden children, That kind of seeing feels like death. It feels like a curse. It feels like being dragged into the light. So they warned each other, the only way guilty people know how, don't look in his eyes. Not because his eyes killed, because if you looked, you might finally recognize the monster staring back. And once you recognize it, you can't pretend you don't. Not ever again.